you're thrown into that situation and you love your baby, you'll do anything for your baby, and you dig deep and find strength you didn't even know you had. Welcome to the CHC Podcast, Congenital Heart Conversations. I am Anna Jaworski and a heart mom to an adult with a single ventricle heart. I'm also the executive producer of this podcast. We have two co-hosts here today.
Hi, I'm Edwin Beatty, and I have acquired long kidney syndrome due to medications that I take for other conditions. I'm also a bereaved sibling of my brother Edward, who died from an undiagnosed heart defect.
Hello, I'm Annie Alchak, and I was born with nomenclature hypoplastic left heart syndrome.
I'm super excited to have Ayrton and Annie take over the interview portion of this episode. Today, I'll be one of the panelists. In the second segment, you'll have a chance to meet our patrons and some of our volunteers. And in the third segment, you'll meet our co-producers, Nicole Bilodeau and Guy Simkhay. They'll meet with all of us to talk about what they learned from this discussion. So take it away, Ayrton.
Today's town hall meeting deals with what it's like to raise a child with a congenital heart defect. We have three panelists with us today. Regina Lawrence is Aubrey's mother. Aubrey was born with DeGeorge syndrome. Aubrey has had 2 open heart surgeries at both children's hospitals, and she will need her pulmonary valve replaced.
Anna Jaworski is Hope's mother, and Hope has a single ventricle heart. She has had 3 open heart surgeries, including a Fontan revision and a modified Mays procedure. She will be 30 years old in August 2024, this year.
And the final panelist is Hava Simkhay. Guy Simkhay has had 7 open heart surgeries before developing arrhythmias in his 30s, which required a heart transplant. Guy received his heart in 2022.
So, first question for all the panelists. All 3 of you mothers have had children who have undergone multiple open heart surgeries. What was the most difficult part of handing your child over to the surgeon? Regina, we're going to start with you first.
Thank you. I will say the hardest part was handing your baby over to a surgeon when my daughter Aubrey was 2 days old, and you are thinking that you just delivered this baby and now your baby is getting sent to the OR.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Anna?
My baby was not diagnosed in utero and was not diagnosed right after birth. So I think what the hardest thing was for me was that I had 2 months with my baby saying something was wrong, being told pretty much that I was an overprotective parent and not to compare my second child to my first child. So when a diagnosis was finally given to us, handing my baby over and knowing that that might be the last time I hold my baby alive, I think that was definitely the hardest part.
I don't know how you guys do it. Hava, your response?
I would say that the first surgery, Guy was only 8 months old, and it was a big unknown, other than the fact that I knew that the surgeon would have to stop his heart for the surgery, and that was scary. But I must admit that when he went for the second, third, fourth heart surgeries, you're still fearful because you know that every surgery has its own challenges and its own complications. Because you've been through that once or twice or 3 times, you're just as scared the first time, knowing so much could happen during the surgery and after the surgery, just praying and hoping that the surgery would be successful and that the recovery would be as uncomplicated as possible.
Thank you so much.
Hannah, your child's diagnosis was changed with your 3rd open heart surgery from hypoplastic left heart syndrome to single ventricle. What does this mean regarding your child's prognosis?
Thank you, Ayrton. That's a great question because It was hard enough to get the hypoplastic left heart syndrome diagnosis and come to grips with what that meant. But then later, when they said, well, it's not really hypoplastic left heart syndrome, it was a little bit difficult to come to grips with that because I finally felt like I understood what hypoplastic left heart syndrome meant. And now I had a new diagnosis, and that was single ventricle. The thing is that hypoplastic left heart syndrome, hypoplastic right heart syndrome, single ventricle, they're all pretty much under the same umbrella. So single ventricle is the big umbrella, and HLHS, HRHS goes under that umbrella. So it didn't really change the prognosis much, but it made me appreciate that my child did not have classic hypoplastic left heart syndrome. And because it wasn't a classic case, and by that I mean my child had transposition of the great vessels. So really, my child's bigger pumping chamber was probably the left one, which is what we needed it to be so that it could perform better longer. Because of that, it made me realize that my child probably had a better chance to live a longer life. It gave me hope that maybe my child would do better longer and not need a transplant as soon as what they were afraid my child might need. My child will be 30 this year and is still functioning with her own funky heart, and we're going to keep it as long as we can.
Yeah, I can understand how it can be so confusing to be told one thing, only for the doctors to turn around and say, actually, no, we think it's something completely different.
Luckily, it wasn't completely different, but there certainly is a big learning curve understanding all this medical jargon when you were trained to be a teacher of the deaf. Everybody just assumed the heart was okay. So, yeah, for the last 30 years, I've been getting a pretty good education on the heart and the different parts of the heart.
Hava, Guy made it all the way to his 30s with his funky heart. How difficult was it for you to watch your son's health decline to the point of needing a heart transplant?
So you're correct. Guy was lucky enough to make it to the age of 46 before he needed a heart transplant. The arrhythmia that he developed in his 30s was actually a life-threatening arrhythmia. It was ventricular tachycardia. And he had a few episodes where he had like a storm, which means he has the tachycardia. He had a defibrillator implanted, a pacemaker defibrillator, which would shock him to regular rhythm. And then right away, he would go back into the arrhythmia and it would shock him again. So that's a storm where he has so many episodes, one after the other, and the device cannot really break them completely. And we had to be prepared and know ahead of time that if something happens, at which point do you run to the emergency room or call an ambulance to come by? Guy's situation was deteriorating, meaning he was getting those more frequently. It would scare him. It would scare us. Luckily, the relationships we developed with the doctors at the Mayo Clinic, we really trusted them. And we knew through our experience that they don't rush to aggressive treatment. They're very conservative. And they always took the time to talk about options with us and explain the situation to us. It took a few years from when they first started preparing us that at some point we would need to consider a heart transplant. When they explained to us that he would have a better quality of life with the transplant, it made it easier for us to accept that that's the next step. They talked us through the full process. And yet, even for someone that has seen a child go through so many heart surgeries, when you hear about transplant, it's scary. The whole idea that they would remove his native heart and put a new heart in, it's scary. But what really helped me was that someone introduced me to a Facebook group of transplant patients and their families. I started reading what other transplant patients went through. It's very scary. You hear those horrible experiences. You hear about unsuccessful transplants, and you have to be able to sift through the information and gather the information that would help you prepare for that. It was a big team that took care of Guy. They all became like friends, held our hands, and really prepared us for the experience. And they were there by our side through the transplant, the hospitalization, the long recovery. You never prepared for it, but they make it easier.
Wow, that is so interesting. So it sounds like you really had great opportunities and a community to be able to help you with what was going on with Guy needing a transplant. Since you did so much learning and the doctors are wonderful teaching you and talking to you about what's going on, as well as that Facebook group, what do you wish you had known then that you know now?
I think if you have the opportunity to talk to someone who really went through that and had a successful experience, just gives you a little bit more courage. If we've heard of somebody who's coming there for a transplant, we try to be the ones that really encourage them a little bit and talk to them about the experience. When you go through the recovery and there's so many ups and downs, just sharing experiences is helpful. This is what we missed during the times that he went through open heart surgeries. At that time, there weren't support groups like this. You really were just surrounded by a few other patients that were with you in the hospital. Nowadays, there are a lot more opportunities to really talk to other patients and their families and just encourage one another and help one another.
Thank you so much, Hava.
Regina, Aubrey had COVID. Can you tell us about your experience with having a child in the hospital with COVID?
I did not know Aubrey had COVID. She was 6 months old. There was no vaccine available for her age group yet. I brought her to Boston on 4 liters of oxygen. Within being in the ER for 2 hours, the cardiac doctors came down and saw her and said, "This is not my little Aubrey that we know." They did COVID tests, found out she was positive, got her on the CPAP machine, got her on the BiPAP machine. Within 2 hours, they said, "Let's see if there's a bed available up in the cardiac ICU." Within 10 minutes, they wheeled her up to the cardiac ICU. They brought me up there. I could not go in her room. I had to literally stand outside her room while they were intubating her. A cardiology team tapped me on the back and said, "Mama, I can't believe you drove her here and she's still alive." They told me if I tested positive for COVID that I could not visit for 2 weeks. And it kind of broke my heart. All the cardiac nurses that we had when she had her first open heart surgery, some of them were the same nurses that took care of her when she had COVID. I did have COVID, so I had to stay home for 10 days. They did Zoom calls. I could call the unit and talk to the nurse. And then I was able to come and go in the hospital, but I could not use any of the bathrooms in the hallways. I had to use every hand sanitizer that I walked by, and the only bathroom that I could use was the bathroom in her room. I had to let my nurse know what I wanted for lunch because I could not leave her room. When I was leaving for the day, that's the only time I could walk the halls. It was very difficult. She was in the hospital for 3 months. 3 months with COVID. She had COVID back in October 2023. Because she has all her vaccines up to date with COVID, it wasn't as bad. I did have to bring her in for a weekend overnight just so that she could get fluids, and they had a IV medication that they could give her. I am thankful that I knew what to do. Yes, they told me I should have never put her on 4 liters of oxygen, but I did it, and look at her today.
It must have been so scary those first 2 days, especially when you had to be separated from her. I can't imagine what that was like for you.
It was very hard to be away from her for that long, but at least I knew that they could Zoom or I can phone the nurse.
Raising a child with congenital heart condition is challenging, but it can also be rewarding. Can you please share with us a memory you have of something your child did that made you especially proud? Hava, we'll start with you first, please.
I think that it's hard to really think about just one thing that guy did or does that made us proud. I would quote his courage and resiliency as what I'm most proud of, because I've never heard Guy complain about the fact that he had to go through so many medical interventions. Always has the most positive outlook on life, most positive attitude. He needs very little to be happy and satisfied with his life. And I think that without that positive attitude, without his will to go on with his life and enjoy life as much as he can, we wouldn't have been here. He's had surgeries where he had strokes, where he had to go through prolonged rehabilitation, and he always bounced back. And it's not the doctors, it's not the nurses, it's not us being by his side. It's him, it's his attitude, it's his will that makes him fight and want to be as strong and as healthy as he could be. And I couldn't have been more proud of him because of that character. And I always say that he was born with a very special heart that made him so unique.
Thank you. Yes, as I've gotten to know him more, he really is a special guy. Thank you, Hava. Regina, your turn.
I am very thankful that Aubrey is still here with us today. I am so proud of her, especially learning how to walk within the past month or so. We have been going through so much different therapies because she is so delayed. But I am especially proud of the special memory of her taking her first steps with a walker because we missed the crawling stage. It's been a tough time to get her to walk.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's interesting how something that seems average for those without a CHD when we are growing up, doing those milestones such as learning how to walk, are so monumentous and wonderful because we know they're continuing with their stages of growing up. Thank you, Regina. Anna, your turn.
Well, Regina, our child also started walking before crawling, which I was a little bit concerned about, but I didn't need to worry about it because later Big Brother was playing with cars and trucks on the floor. So, of course, the little one had to do the same thing the big one was doing. And we did get crawling in, and then the walking stopped for a while. So then I had that to worry about. So our kiddos give us one reason after another to worry. But I think for me, one of my proudest moments was when we were in the karate dojo and my child was given a black belt. At that time, I didn't know any other kids with HLHS, and it was my child's diagnosis, who made it all the way to the black belt because it's such a rigorous program that they have to go through. And my child had stopped karate for a while because it did become too rigorous and had a catheterization and was told that there were problems with the Fontan, but there was nothing that could be done. And the Fontan wasn't bad enough to require surgery. We just had to wait. So we started doing robotics and put our attention elsewhere. But then my child said, you know what, Mom, I'm not done. I need to go back. I didn't give it my all, and went back to the dojo after a 6-month break, got back where all the rest of the kids in the class were, and earned that black belt. So I think that black belt ceremony is imprinted in my brain, and I'll never forget how proud I was when that black belt was awarded to my child.
That's beautiful, Anna. And you are correct. A lot of single ventricle and HLHS children don't get to do something like karate due to the fact that a lot of us are warned to be careful with the chest. So knowing Hope has gotten all the way to a black belt is just amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that.
It was, and no chest protector, which scared me to death. The cardiologist said, are any of the other students wearing a chest protector? And I said, no. And then the cardiologist said, well, then she doesn't need a chest protector. So I was holding my breath during every single sparring match for fear that something would happen. And obviously nothing did. But I think there were opportunities where something could have gone wrong, and that they didn't was just amazing. And probably nothing short of a miracle, to be honest with you. And running that mile, oh my gosh, that was one of the tasks that they had to do to earn their black belt. And it was a day in Texas where there was a heat advisory out for anybody who had respiratory or cardiac problems. And yet there was my kid with hypoplastic left heart syndrome running around the track at the high school to get their mile in. I was scared, and I was not allowed to be there. So it was quite an arduous experience.
Thank you, Anna.
I want to thank the panelists for sharing. And when we come back, it will be time for our patrons to ask questions or share their experiences with us. Would you like to be part of our audience? Our patrons and volunteers are invited to attend recordings with us. You can be a patron by visiting our website, www.heartsunitetheglobe.com. It's so easy for you to get involved, so you can help us bring the podcast to life.
Embark on a heartwarming odyssey with Baby Heart's Pressure Gateway to uplifting stories for the CHD community. Introducing the Heart of a Heart Warrior book series, inspiring those born with heart defects and their loved ones. Discover the heart of a mother, the heart of a father, and my brother needs an operation. Books celebrating strength, love, and familial support. Visit babyheartspress.com and be part of our loving community, uplifting hearts one story at a time.
The CHC Congenital Heart Conversations podcast is a presentation of Hearts Unite the Globe, or HUG, and is part of the HUG Podcast Network. HUG is a nonprofit organization devoted to providing resources to the congenital heart defect community to enrich the lives of our community members. For free CHD resources, please visit our website at congenitalheartdefects.com.
You are listening to the CHC Podcast. If you have a question or comment that you would like addressed on our show, please send an email to Anna Jaworski at anna@thechcpodcast.com. That's anna@thechcpodcast.com. Now, back to the CHC Podcast.
Welcome back. We're talking about raising a child with a congenital heart defect in today's podcast episode. And now our patrons and volunteers are able to share their experiences or ask questions of our panelists. Guy, thank you for raising your hand.
Thank you, Hava, for participating and for giving all of us her insights from when I was a kid growing up. And Anna, when you were talking about Hope getting her black belt, that was impressive as well. And Regina, I would like to commend you on telling your story about Aubrey getting COVID at 6 months old. to the brain.
Thank you, Guy. And I apologize. I meant to introduce you. Guy is one of our volunteers on the CHC podcast. I see Nicole Bilodeau's hand is up. Nicole is also a volunteer with the CHC podcast.
Thanks, Annie. My question is for Annie. You spent the better part of the first 2 months of your child's life trying to advocate for them because you knew that there was something wrong, but it didn't seem like you were getting anyone to listen to you. So do you have any tips for any other parent that might be going through something similar, regardless of whether it's a cardiac issue or some other kind of issue where they just feel like there is something wrong, but can't get the doctor to do anything?
That's such a good question, because if I knew then what I know now, I would have done things very differently. I did take my baby back and forth to the lactation consultants. We saw 3 different lactation consultants, and I learned all the different holds for a baby because Hope kept falling asleep on me and couldn't nurse for more than 5 minutes before falling asleep. And I knew that wasn't normal, but she came 3 weeks early. So that's why the doctors were saying, oh, well, she just still thinks she's inside of you. I wish I had taken her to a different hospital. We live in a small town. There's one big hospital that treats patients for a 100-mile radius. And it's also the hospital where my husband works. So I thought she couldn't get better care anywhere aside from there. If I had taken her to another hospital, maybe I would have gotten a different response. So I would say get a second opinion at a different hospital. Don't assume that the hospital that you are at is the one that will necessarily be the best place for her at that time. That was a tough lesson to learn in advocacy, but I think we learned a lot, don't you, Frank? Frank is here too. We both knew something was wrong.
Absolutely. It was terribly frustrating, and I did not have pediatric experience at that time. I did work in the adult cardiac ICU, but my experience didn't extend to kids, and I didn't really know what was going on. Like Anna said, we knew there was a problem from the very beginning, so very frustrating. We were lucky that things worked out as well as they did, but it changed my attitude about dealing with other medical professionals.
Thank you, guys. Hava, I actually have a question. Has Guy always received his medical care at the Mayo Clinic, or was he somewhere before that?
Good questions. Actually, all of Guy's medical procedures were at the Mayo Clinic. Guy was actually born in Israel. And 47 years ago, in Israel being a small country, they had a great pediatric cardiac surgeon, but they lacked the experience. So when he was 8 months old, we brought him all the way here to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota for the first surgery, but then he developed a complication that required him to have a second surgery on the 5th day. And after that, he was doing very poorly and we almost lost him. But then we went back to Israel. And when he was 4, we moved to the United States. We thought that we were coming just for a couple of years. And we said, let's go to the Mayo Clinic and have them take a second look at him. They haven't seen him in 4 years. They checked him and diagnosed that he needed to have another immediate surgery. And after that, we realized that his motor development was delayed, his speech was delayed. We didn't know at that point that when he was a baby and had the first surgeries, he actually had a stroke that was not diagnosed. And that really impacted his development. Very quickly, we realized that the medical treatment that he gets at the Mayo Clinic is really superb. So we've been living in New York since the 1980s, and still for every medical procedure, whether it's open heart surgeries, catheterizations, ablations for the arrhythmias, we always came back to the Mayo Clinic. I think another important factor that makes us come to the Mayo Clinic is the relationships that we developed with his doctors at the Mayo Clinic. a few times when we had to go to the emergency room in New York City, we would get a phone call from his doctors from Mayo to the doctors at the ER. At one point, when he started having the arrhythmias and he had that ventricular tachycardia storm, we went to the emergency room in the hospital in New York. He was admitted to the cardiac intensive care unit there. The doctors at Mayo organized very quickly, once he was stabilized, medical evacuation for him to bring him from the intensive care unit in the hospital in New York to the intensive care unit here at the hospital in Minnesota. So we really felt that the best place for him, for his medical treatments, is the Mayo Clinic.
Thank you, Hava. I really appreciate that. That's a lot, going from Israel and then moving to New York so that he can continue his care at the Mayo Clinic. And you are correct. When you have that kind of relationship with the medical team and the doctors, it's pretty amazing when you have to go somewhere else that they help out wherever and whenever it's necessary. And on that, Regina, do you feel that way too, similar with Aubrey's care and her doctors?
Yes, thank you, Annie. When I was pregnant with Aubrey, I met with the cardiologist at Boston Children's Hospital, and she is currently with that same cardiologist. She sees other specialists at Boston Children's Hospital. I believe we're up to 14 or 15 specialists, but she's had most of them since birth.
Thank you, Regina.
I want to thank our guests for sharing their stories and experiences with us today. Thank you, Anna Jaworski.
Thank you so much for letting me be a panelist today. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Regina Lawrence.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, Hava Simkhay.
Thank you for having me for this session.
We'll take a short break and then meet with our producers to end this episode.
This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The opinions expressed in the podcast are not those of Hearts Unite the Globe, but of the hosts and guests, and are intended to spark discussion about issues pertaining to congenital heart disease or bereavement.
Welcome back. Now it's time for Nicole Bilodeau and Hava Simkhay to talk about this episode with Annie Lee. Nicole discovered she had a congenital heart defect as an adult whose Guy is Hava's son. They were working behind the scenes during the recording.
What do you all think about the show? Nicole, let's start with you first.
I think we should put a disclaimer that you need some tissue before you start listening to this episode, because I spent half of it in tears. But overall, I really enjoyed the episode because I enjoyed hearing from the parent point of view what things were like. I was diagnosed as an adult, and because my parents are no longer with us, so they did not go through any of this with me. And it's just nice to hear their perspective during all the different procedures and at the time of diagnosis.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. Guy, your thoughts?
I agree. Thank you, Annie. I have to agree with Nicole. What she said summed it up very well. Learning from Regina, my mom, and Anna about how they perceive everything with their kids. That's what I got, and I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, Guy. Yeah, I have to agree. It's amazing listening to these three individuals talking about their children's congenital heart defects and how their journeys have been. Regina and Aubrey, and her journey still is really moving forward as she ages. And then with you going from Israel to New York to Mayo, and then Anna with also her husband Frank, listening to Hope's original diagnosis to now what it's become, a single ventricle, and having to learn all these other pieces and factors. It is quite interesting. Ayrton, any thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, for me, it was just emotional to listen to these three mothers talk about the children. and what they've gone through and how young some of them were when they underwent first operation. I couldn't imagine ever having to go through something like that.
To be fair, we couldn't either. We didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
It's just something that you're thrown into that situation, and you love your baby. You'll do anything for your baby, and you dig deep and find strength you didn't even know you had.
Yeah, it's those moments where you find out just how much strength you really do have. The mama bear instinct.
Absolutely.
And I have to say that's strength. You may not all realize it, but it's what makes us CHDers have the strength to continue moving forward because of you all.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's not something we mothers usually get to hear.
I would agree with what Abby said. It's incredible how 3 women of different backgrounds have dealt with such a hard decision, and still they plowed their way through with the support of their spouse and family.
Yeah. What surprised you the most, Nicole?
I think it's the strength that each one of them had to be able to hand their child over to a complete stranger and have faith that that person is going to be able to go in and fix what the issue was. And I realized that for everybody, it wasn't an overall cure, but it has gotten everybody to where they're at this point. So we were talking about the strength, and I know that in all of the instances, you didn't have a choice. I'm not a parent, so I don't know, but I would like to think that I would be able to do that as well. But the strength is truly inspiring.
Guide, what surprised you the most?
All of it. All the stories, all of us participants sharing their insights was really impressive. Thank you, everything.
Annie, what surprised you?
I think my biggest takeaway from the show was the main theme for this was love. Love for your child. The love that you had so that you could move forward and do what's necessary, as tough as it is, as heartbreaking those moments must have been. It's scary, but also knowing that with this love, you're allowing that child of yours to be given an opportunity to grow up, have those milestones, continue moving forward and growing in any way that you hope that they grow, and be able to be pieces of you that show strength towards others when they may not be having that strength that day. And also my other biggest takeaway is Guy. At 46 as a transplant patient. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how old you were when you had a transplant. I thought you were younger for some reason, but you're actually giving me hope on something. So, I mean, hope and love, those are my biggest takeaways on this show. Thank you.
And you're very welcome. That's what I don't attempt to do, but happens all the time. And I know that you will make it. And we are your family.
Yeah, we love you, Annie. And I love you guys too. All of you. And Ayrton, what was your biggest takeaway?
I think it's just, I know the word tenacity came up, but I think it doesn't just describe the children. It also describes the mothers. Because if it wasn't for the mothers, the children wouldn't have made it as far in some aspects. Because especially in the case of Hope, if Frank and Anna hadn't fought to get answers as to what was wrong with her, she wouldn't be with us now. And the few conversations I've had with Hope, she is an amazing person, and the two of you should be really proud of her.
Thank you, Ayrton. That means a lot. Told you I wouldn't get through this without crying. I knew this was going to be a tough episode to do, but there were a lot of takeaways. Hava, I loved hearing your story. Guy has told us a little bit, but you really shared so much with us that it gives us more of an appreciation for where he's been and how lucky he is to have you for a mom.
Now we're lucky to have him as a son. We always say that we are what we are, not because of him, but thanks to him. I actually have something that I wanted to share with you as I was hearing, Anna, about your journey with Hope. After the transplant, Guy, myself, and my husband, we got to meet with a pathologist who actually checked his native heart after the transplant and was able to really explore it. And he actually said that all the diagnoses throughout Guy's life were spot on. They did not miss anything. Ever since he was a baby, the way they diagnosed his malformation, the diagnosis related to the arrhythmias, they were spot on all the time. So that was amazing to us to hear that.
Yeah, that is amazing, especially, no offense, Guy, but especially considering how old he is. They didn't have the quality of diagnostic equipment that they do now.
Absolutely, you're right. You're spot on. Thankfully, from what they learned from our children as they grew up, I think that all of that led to the way medicine is today and what they're able to do today with young children like Aubrey. Hopefully, Aubrey will have a bright future just because of their abilities today compared to what our children went through.
Yes, there is hope.
One of the things I'd like to say is that what I do for a living is I'm an anesthetist. I give anesthesia for surgery and procedures. The experience that Anna and I had with how difficult it is to give your child over to caregivers to take them to surgery, and everybody else has their experience reflects that too. What's easy to forget is that anytime you are taking somebody from somebody else in order to take them for a procedure, doesn't matter what their age is or what the procedure is, the people you leave behind are scared. So when I go to pick up patients, I always turn to the family and tell them, we'll take good care of them. We'll be right back, and try to reassure them that we're going to do the right things for them and take care of them, because it's hard to have a stranger come and take your husband or wife or child or father away for a few hours. So I've learned from that, I hope, and I hope I give that back to the patients that I take care of.
That's great. Thank you.
You're the best, and that's why people ask for you to do their anesthesia. Not that I'm biased or anything.
You're up.
Thank you for joining us today on the CHC Podcast. We'll hope you'll join us next month, where we'll be talking about World Heart Rhythm Week and what that means to the CHD community. Until then, I'm Ayrton.
And I'm Annie.
Have a great day and keep those congenital heart conversations going on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram.
Thank you for joining us. The CHC Podcast can be heard monthly wherever you get your podcasts. Visit us on Facebook or Instagram to continue the conversations. Join the Hearts Unite the Globe Patreon group and become part of our town hall meetings. It's simple. Just visit www.heartsunitetheglobe.org and select the tab that says Donate to Hug with Patreon. Then you too can be part of the conversation.